Anonymous Throwdown episode 20. What's up, guys?
What's up?
How you doing?
So we had the big election over the past week, and that race was called for Joe Biden yesterday, and everybody is going insane. Obviously, a very contentious election. I will say that if the results hold and like after the court litigations that are filed by the Trump, if all the states as currently tasked hold, I was one vote off in my electoral map prediction. I predicted 305 electoral votes for Biden, and he's going to get 306. So I would just like to say I am a genius political scientist. That is all. Thank you.
And I've been studying a little bit of political science too.
Oh yeah,
just on my own.
Yeah.
But I think for anyone with just a bipartisan view of this election, everyone knew that the odds were stacked against Trump. In reality,
and I think it's fair to say that they were in 2016 as well, and that's why so many people were like, "Well,
he was the underdog there." Yeah,
he was the underdog in both elections.
I thought Biden would have swept him more because, I was under the impression that I thought Texas actually had a good chance of flipping, and it actually was a very close race in Texas in terms of previous years. But I actually thought Florida was going to flip too, but Georgia came out to be the underdog.
Yeah, nobody saw Georgia. Like you said, everybody was looking for Texas or Florida, but Texas wasn't really that close. It was 52 to 46.
And that's a lot of people. So
that's a lot of people. That is about 600,000 votes. So given that context, and then you look at the state, it's like all red besides Dallas, Austin, Houston, which is the same for every other state in the country, to be fair. But and then Florida.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say to your other point that Florida actually was not that close either. It was closer in 2016, which is really interesting. And all the data coming in showed that Trump overperformed with Hispanic voters relative to 2016. And I think that makes perfect sense because in 2016, his campaign was focused much more on immigration. In 2020, much more on the economy and those types of issues. Whereas in 2016, immigration was a leading issue, which has been proven empirically to be a little bit alienating to Hispanic voters. So, and it's very interesting going forward to is the Republican Party going to lean into that further and be like, wow, we keep making positive traction with Hispanic voters. And because the weird thing is when I was growing up, the Republican Party was like the rich person party. Like all the rich people were Republicans and working middle class and lower class people tend to be Democrats, which tends to still be true. But I think we're seeing that change a little bit with Trump. He's created more of a working class coalition out of the Republican Party. So very interesting to see what happens with and then Georgia, which had historically been a safely red state, now looks like it's going to Biden and
pending recount.
That race is super close. So
pending
there's
recount.
Definitely going to be recount.
That's a margin of what, 10,000 votes?
Yeah, it's
incredibly small. And
it really is kind of crazy how close so many of the states were. There were some that were 49 to 49 for a little bit, and that's some of the closest of a lot of these states. I know that in Nevada and Arizona, for example, it was super close in both of those. That's probably widened a little bit, but
I think Nevada's widened for sure, just because a lot of their outstanding ballots were from, I think, Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is. Las Vegas is historically blue-leaning. So I'm going to check it right now. That's a margin of about 22,000 votes, 32,000 votes in Nevada. And in PA, you're looking at a margin of about 43,000, which is not a lot, but that's enough to secure a win, even through recount. Because recounts historically have only yielded, 2,000 to 3,000 votes for the other person.
Mm-hmm.
I think Gobi would know more about that, but it's never a big margin.
Right. And another interesting thing to look at is votes that went to other candidates. In 2016, the vote for Jill Stein and the Libertarian guy, his name is escaping me.
Gary Johnson.
Thank you. Gary Johnson. There were more votes for them, whereas this time in a lot of the states for the Green Party and Libertarian Party, in Florida, for instance, it was 70,000 for the Libertarian.
I think the Libertarian is the Joe Jorgensen Spike Cohen ticket. And I think the Green Party this time was Howie Hawkins, who's actually the founder of the Green Party.
Is that so?
He's
I never knew that.
Founder of the Green Party. And then you also have the birthday party leaded by Kanye West securing a cool 6,000 votes this election.
Kanye got 6,000?
I think so. Yeah, he didn't. He got rightfully demolished. But
I would just like to say that 6,000 people in this country are idiots.
Well,
yeah,
he
If
is
you
running
ran,
again in 2024, so we'll see.
so my view on third party nominees is it'll never end well with the way our country's set up. The last time a big libertarian or third party, I think it was the Reform Party by Ross Perot, that was in what, 92 with
right,
Clinton and George H.W. And that's truly what made H.W. a one-term president, was because the reform ticket was actually just basically Republican but a little bit more libertarian leaning. So that split the Republican vote and gave Bill Clinton a pretty easy win. And then after that, I I think Trump ran, and I think he actually ran under Ross Perot's party in 2000. I might be
that's
wrong,
right.
but
He's run a couple times. Trump has.
yeah, and he never gained serious footing because I don't
No,
think he
and then
actually knew what he was talking about. That sounds bad, but like I don't think he had his own vision for what he wanted cemented in his brain
it was like this.
until
It was like the
2016.
equivalent of like Kanye West running for president when Trump ran.
He was doing
Two
it because
decades
he was a
ago.
billionaire, right?
Right. And and then you're exactly right. He found that the strategy is not to do a third party run because it's never going to work because the institutions of like the Republican Democratic Party and this, bipartisan system that we have in the country is just too powerful to overcome as one person, as an independent. So the best way to win is actually to be like an insurgent into a party. Because if you recall in 2016, when Trump was debating like all 7,000 other Republican candidates, they all hated him. Rand
Yeah,
Paul, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, like they all hated the guy and thought that he was like, he's not a real Republican and he's basically a fraud. And that's what they. If you go back and watch the 2016 Republican presidential races, that's what they all were. Like all the debates were like, he's not a
and
real
it was heated.
Republican, this and that. Right.
Well, not
And
It
only
was
that,
very.
but even like Lindsey Graham was on record back in like 2016 or so, and he was like Donald Trump. I don't remember what he said, but it was basically like he did not like Trump. He's like, I hope he doesn't win the ticket because he's ridiculous. I don't want to be associated with him. So yeah, the whole Republican Party was very skeptical when
hmm
he was trying to make his name as a Republican as a presidential candidate.
But when you
and
get elected president in the United States, you are the leader of the party in which you won.
Yep.
So Joe Biden is the leader of the Democratic Party now. And that was the same case in 2016. Oh, and just my final point, I'll let you go, Dustin. So in Florida, this time in 2020, the Libertarian candidate garnished 70,000 votes, and in 2016, the Libertarian candidate got 200,000 votes.
oh
So
wow,
that was a big reason as to why Trump won just barely in Florida. It was 48 to 47%, and this time it was 51 to 47 because like all, those libertarian votes were, into Trump or Biden. And so
hmm
yeah, Trump won by a lot more in Florida, several points more. Texas, I thought it was closer last time, but in 2016, Hillary only got like 42% in Texas, so that wasn't particularly close. Although that state is going more and more blue, which would be a big problem for Republicans if Texas ever does go blue, because
hmm that's a
that's their
guaranteed win, I think.
well, that's their big cash cow with 38 electoral votes. So
Yeah.
Florida's not a guarantee with 29 electoral votes, and the Democrats have California with 55, and New York has 29. So
hmm
Texas has 38. So the Republicans, really need to, if they want to win going forward, they need to make sure that they hold on to Texas.
And another thing that I hope the RNC does is a lot of the reason why Trump isn't that liked by a fair majority of the country is because of how he is personality wise. I
Right.
think they need to move away from someone who talks loud and is just a dick sometimes, to be fair.
Yeah.
Granted, it works. That really
Mhm.
works for him, but I think next time they need to get a more soft spoken political sounding, electee. I've actually been hearing a lot of talk about Tucker Carlson running in 2024. I don't know if you've heard about that, Kobe, but
Yes, I have.
that's actually like a thing, and I don't think that would work, frankly. I know he's got the
You really
highest
don't think
rated.
so?
I know he's got the highest rated talk show or TV show period, right? But I feel
But
like
yeah,
he
go ahead.
has a lot of stuff from his past that might come back and haunt him.
Well, but here's the thing. Trump did too. Trump had more dirt in his past than like any other person. and it didn't work. But granted, he is a very different figure, because if you go back to 2016, if you remember every election has the October surprise, right? In 2016 with Hillary Clinton, it was the emails.
Ooh,
But another,
tell me.
a later October surprise was actually with the clips, like the grab them by the P word, like clip. I don't want to say the real words so we don't get demonetized, but and that clip leaked from the Hollywood All Access thing or whatever, and all of his advisors were telling him to, like, you need to come out and apologize, you need to come out and say, like, this was a horrible mistake, and he never did that. He was like, it was
No.
just locker room talk. And I think that was a very intentional move, where it was very much so playing into the idea of not standing down to like the media mob or political correctness or whatever. So he kind of apologized and acknowledged that it was locker room talk and therefore probably not good to do. But he never was like, I'm sorry for saying that. Of course. And
Yeah,
in
and
Trumpian fashion, he never did that. So,
we've
but
never
that
seen
was
him
intentional by
apologize.
Trump. His advisors were all telling him to apologize. And I think that there's maybe something to be learned from that. One question I have for both of you guys is, how do you think history will look back upon Trump? Because I'm very interested in the
Ooh.
notion that, like, on one hand, he's very hated by, like, media figures in the United States, but he is very much so a transformational figure, and especially if these demographic switches continue to happen with, like, with the Hispanic vote going more towards the Republican Party and building more of a working class coalition, but even more than that, of, like, working on criminal justice reform. That's something that Republicans have not been known to do. He very much so was, like, third rail in some aspects, and then in other aspects, like on courts and appointing justices, very much so like a more traditional Republican president. But I just am very interested in how history will look back upon his presidency.
You bring up a good point, I think, both for the Republican Party as a whole, but also with how Trump will be remembered, because he is definitely a very unprecedented president. He, like you mentioned, with his personality, it's very big and over the top.
Right.
I think that in regards to the party itself, we'll see with time what happens. I think that there could be some people in the future that look back and consider some of the things that he did good for the party. I think as a president himself, he'll kind of be remembered similarly to Andrew Jackson, who was kind of famously also kind of just a strange guy. Like one time, uh, I don't remember exactly what happened, but someone tried to like assassinate him and he went and beat them with his stick. And then another time he was in a duel and they
Oh
shot
yeah.
him, and then he just like wiped the blood away, smiled, and shot them back dead. so so I think that Trump will kind of be remembered in that same boat of being a little bit I don't want to say crazy, but just a little bit uh unpredictable in regards to what he was going to do. He didn't follow the norm in any sense of what presidents are sort of expected to do. We even look at him needing to leave office if it remains as is, and he's not willing to give a concession speech as far as we know. So I think
Mhm.
that he'll be looked back on, and like him or don't like him, I think he'll be remembered pretty well, at least for a little bit, just because what he did stood out so much because it is so unprecedented.
Mhm. So I feel like in a sense it's gonna take me a lot to answer that. So I'm gonna throw you a hypothetical, okay?
Okay.
Do you think if he victoriously ran the second term, right? Do you think he would go down like a Bush and be seen as one of the worst presidents of all time? Because Bush had a similar acceptance rate to Trump in his first 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
and they both actually have very similar presidencies in the term. I mean, yes, I know both have had a big tragedy happen in their presidency, and how
Mm.
they handle that
Mhm.
tragedy further shapes how they are going to be seen. So with Bush, he had 9/11 happen. What was it? 8 months into his presidency, he was a
Yep.
very new president. Trump, it actually kind of was the opposite, where it was 8 months before his presidency ended.
Yep.
So I
Which is the
feel,
worst situation to be in. Like, the reason that Bush was able to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
oh no,
yeah,
you're
it
okay.
like having a tragedy just before COVID definitely derailed his election odds a lot,
Yep.
because, say what you will, the economy was going pretty well. We didn't have any no new wars, and that's another thing that, as I said, looking back on history, like, he's going to be looked at as a very transformational figure, I think, for American politics, like him or not. Like, his foreign policy was definitely unlike the past Republican presidents for the past several decades, namely George Bush, and then also with he had an openness to like criminal justice reform and other issues that other Republicans had not been open to, and I think that that is something that's pretty interesting about his presidency. But anyway, I'm sorry, what were you saying? But yeah, that you were talking about the tragedy 8 months before the end of the re-election.
And I feel like a lot of what is going to hinge on how he's remembered is honestly how Biden's going to pick up the coronavirus if he is actually the electee. So as of right now, the general consensus is that we're not doing a great job handling the virus at all. And I believe, actually, I think Texas just passed 1 million cases today, right? And there's something like 267 thousand dead people from COVID in the United States, and that's not good for a president. No matter, it's not something he could have stopped. Let me preface with that, but I feel like he waited just a little bit too long to actually address it, and I wonder if that actually hurts the chances of us actually defeating this thing, like a lot of countries have. And granted, if Biden can get this virus under the rug within the first year, which he's not, I think it would look better for his legacy, but I think Trump's legacy is actually going to get stained by COVID in the handling of that.
The interesting thing is that if Trump had gotten a second term, presidents tend to be much more unifying in their second term because they are working on building their legacy. Yeah, that's very common. And for somebody like Trump in particular, I think that is of particular concern, is like the way his ego and being perceived by other people. I think that's where you'd always see him, people that would say like, oh, I didn't vote for Trump in 2016 and I don't like Trump and I don't like his personality, but I'm going to vote for him because he did all of these great things. Like, he is enthusiastic to see those endorsements because it's people basically saying he doesn't care if you don't like him as a person. He just wants to win. Like, he wants you to vote for him,
vote.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And he wants you to acknowledge that he's like good at being a president and a good whatever. So yeah, I really think that in his second term, he would have been much more unifying. We could have even seen, I mean, honestly, who knows? You could have seen him marijuana. I mean, I think that he's shown an openness to that. That's something that Joe Biden is probably going to show an openness to, because one of the big things that he's been criticized for is the crime. It's very interesting because Joe Biden's been criticized for the crime bill. And in 1994, the crime bill in 1994, which definitely heavily focused on like marijuana and that type of thing. And then Kamala Harris has also received a lot of criticism for being the DA in California and like in prosecuting people for nonviolent drug crimes and that type of thing. So both of them, I think that is one of their big things that they've been criticized. And if I had to guess, they are going to, at the very least, take marijuana off of the Schedule 1 list so that it is basically decriminalized and that you would not go to jail for possessing it. So that's something that I could see happening federally in the next couple years.
I had another point that I wanted to add on.
Yeah.
I believe that presidents who serve one term generally are going to not be remembered that well.
Yeah.
Correct.
And that is seen throughout history. I mean, the last one-term president was H.W. Bush. I know nothing he did. Before that, it was Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter was an absolute failure for the DNC. For as good of a person as he was bad in office. Frankly, he just didn't do anything. And with Trump, if he truly is a one-term president, I don't want to jinx it because there are still pending lawsuits, but if he is a one-term president, that will greatly harm his reputation. Not reputation, but legacy. He won't be remembered that well. And
I think that you're right. And one caveat to that initial thing that you mentioned, whereas one-term presidents are often not remembered nearly as much, I think that the big caveat is that Trump I've seen him more times on the news than like any other president. Like with Barack Obama, he obviously had a presence in America, but it wasn't like he was on the television every single day saying something controversial. So I think that that's the one difference with Trump, is that he has been so divisive. And again, this isn't an endorsement or a criticism of him. It's just what he said has been very divisive and it's been very big. And so I think that there's a chance that he'll be remembered. But I think that you're right in the sense that since he's only had one term, that could tarnish that legacy as a president a little bit, and that could play a factor into people who wasn't very liked by the American people.
Yeah, and before we even got on this podcast, we wanted to put a disclaimer out, like, we are trying to look at this situation as bipartisan as we can, because it's not up to us to tell you who to vote for or how to feel. We just want to lay out the facts for you to make up your own mind.
Obviously we have our own opinions, but we don't want to alienate half of the audience.
That's what our Twitters are for.
Yeah.
Right? But and speaking of Twitter, I want to ask you guys to make a bet. What do you think the odds are that Twitter suspends Donald Trump's Twitter account after he loses public protection in January?
25% chance of it happening. He keeps getting those like Twitter fact checks.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's a concern. The problem, I'm totally 100% opposed to big tech censorship of any kind, and I think it's because of, I forget the name of it. It's called like the Streisand effect, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
Which is like, so there's two arguments. One is just that my opinion is that big tech, like Twitter and Facebook, especially amid COVID, the First Amendment says that we can go out in public and we can talk about whatever, we can say whatever we want. We can say whatever political opinions we want to say, even if they're false. And we have the right to say those things. And that would be like, if we all meet at a park, the First Amendment protects us to, say whatever we want to say, of course, besides like something that would create some sort of chaos, like yelling fire and this and that. Like there are a few exceptions, but not very many. And I think that now what we're seeing is that Twitter and Facebook and these other, as you can hear my phone going off right now, like that is our new public square. In other words, the way in which we communicate with each other, especially amid COVID, it clearly is on Twitter and Facebook. So I think it is, and I know a lot of people don't like slippery slope arguments. I tend to find them not that convincing. In this case, I find it very convincing. There is a slippery slope argument to be made about big tech censorship. Mm-hmm. And I'm very concerned about this, because all you're doing in flagging all of Trump's tweets is half of the country is then like pissed off, and it doesn't have the effect that you think it has. That's what I'm saying. Is that
I feel like go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go first since I had a small point. I feel tech companies should not interfere unless there's an active call of violence. So,
agreed.
Say if Trump said like, blah, 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 rise up, do basically instigating a second civil war, that's when you should take his Twitter account down. If it's just because he said something mean or because he said something inaccurate, I don't feel as though that should get him taken down. I think that the fact checks are a good idea as long as they're not politically motivated. As long as they're just bipartisan fact checks, like.
But is it possible to have a purely bipartisan fact check?
It is not, unless it's a website like Snopes. I think Snopes is a very good website when it comes to that. Or I've seen Twitter actually handles the bipartisan argument a little bit better than a lot of tech companies, because I don't know if you've seen, a lot of times in the trending tab, it'll say like, oh, Donald Trump said this and this is why it's inaccurate. Sometimes there are other clips where it's like, this clip of Donald Trump was actually altered, and that's not what he actually said. So I think they're actually trying to appease both. But the thing is, in California and Silicon Valley, a lot of these people are going to have majorly Democratic leanings. As you hear my phone
and
clock.
all it does is make people pissed off, and it makes people think like, why do you not want me to see this? And it just, especially in America, I mean, 1984 and George Orwell and all of that, like it has a strong place in American memory and consciousness of all of that. And I think we're all very wary of like these huge corporations. And you have to understand too that, Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg, these are like Andrew Carnegie and Rockefeller. These are our equivalents to those guys. Like they have a lot of power. They have a lot of control. And that, I think that's a little scary, frankly, for me. So that's my position on the censorship thing. And I think that, I don't know. I'm very interested to see what they do with that. I do feel as though Trump could get into trouble for it. But I also just think back to several decades ago, and if fact checks existed, there are so many things that people thought for sure at the time were true or false, and then you look back upon it a couple decades later and you're like, oh, that's crazy. You know what I mean? For instance, if you went to the doctor 60 years ago and you said that you had depression or psychosis or any of these other things, they would literally, not 60 years ago, let's say 80, they would literally cut your brain out and perform lobotomies. Right.
Mm-hmm.
What if somebody went on Facebook or Twitter and was like, lobotomies don't work. This is fake science. It's terrible and evil. Would they be like, all the medical research shows us that lobotomies do work and they're effective treatment for psychosis and depression? You know, like I could easily foresee fact checks on things that we look back upon several decades later and are actually like, oh, never mind, we actually got that wrong. Now, I'm not saying that that is applicable to Trump's tweets per se. That's more of a broader argument regarding big tech censorship and why I think that just on the whole, it's not a good idea. It's very messy. And I think that the Facebook and Twitter should just acknowledge that we are the wall, and whatever people write on the wall, we have no control over that. But as soon as you start taking control over the one thing on the wall that's a little insane, and that's where it always starts. Like it always is like, okay, we banned Alex Jones. Okay, yeah, the guy's a nut, right? But then all of a sudden, then we're banning other people that are, and the Overton window keeps shifting and shifting and shifting and narrowing, so that people on the far left and the far right both, and I think that's where a lot of people think of only people on the far right are being censored, like Alex Jones, but there are a bunch of groups on the far left, Facebook groups that just got purged. So it is something that it seems like a concerted effort to shift the Overton window more and more to the center of like where CNN or Fox News, MSNBC, ABC News, like people kind of within that like acceptable range of where we as a society are. It's the type of thing of like if you heard somebody say it in a public area, you'd be like, okay, you know, that's a reasonable position. They want to eliminate everything outside of that. And I think that's dangerous because who is deciding what that is? And it's going to constantly change. And I'm just very perturbed by that. So thank you for attending my TED Talk.
No problem.
I think in regards to how likely it is that Trump will be suspended I don't think that is likely. And I agree in terms of big tech censorship that would be very dangerous. I do think that there is something to be said about pretty much just saying this is not supported currently. So, for example, when Trump comes out and says, I won the election by a lot, and that's not what is being reported, that is not currently where the stats are. And in fact, it currently appears that Biden has won the election. You know, some people believe that there's fraudulent ballots, and I'm not going to get into that. You know, you can believe what you want on that, but currently it is not accepted that Trump has won this presidency. And so for him to come on and say, I won the presidency, and for him to have the platform that he has, that can be very misleading. And so I think that it's not necessarily a bad idea on Twitter's end to essentially just say this isn't an official, this isn't officially agreed upon yet. There's still some, this is still being disputed. So I also look at, kind of like you mentioned, how this is happening to people on the far right and the far left. And I can kind of see how Twitter and other big tech companies would perhaps want to limit what they're saying, because we're to the point where everyone on the left thinks every conservative is like an extremist MAGA diehard fanboy. And then all the conservatives are thinking that like all the Democrats are these super extreme far left people, which isn't true. I mean, there's tons of people more in the center. So I get where they're coming from, but I also think that it could go into a downward spiral if they start completely censoring people, or if they go overboard on trying to limit what you can see, because the freedom of speech needs to be preserved. But I also don't think that there's an issue with adding to someone's message and just saying consensus is not this, but still allowing them to have their opinion and their statement.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I did want to touch on, and I think this should be the final thing that we talk about until we get out of politics.
All I want to censor is the fucking Snyder Cut people on Twitter. God, ban them all.
You mean the associate producers?
We can get into that in a minute.
No, I was just kidding. Go ahead.
But how do you guys feel about Biden doing a victory speech while there's an ongoing legal battle? Multiple legal battles. Do you think that's the right move to make?
Well, it's very typical. Once the election is called by like all of the, it's been called by AP and Fox News and all, you give a victory speech or a concession speech.
Yeah. And
here's what I'll say about it is that, in my opinion, this is a situation in which there are allegations against some of the states counting some of the ballots, thinking that they're fraudulent. In my opinion, we need to go through due process, which is innocent until proven guilty. So, yes, I think it's fine that Biden gave his acceptance speech. I actually thought it was a very good speech. If there is evidence, like factual evidence, and some people think it already exists, I haven't seen anything that has convinced me that there was widespread fraud of millions of ballots. But if there is evidence that comes out to support that, then absolutely that needs to be investigated and made right. But as it stands right now, I think it's innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah. And with Biden, his big platform move now is actually more onto unity. And I think for him to actually be able to unify America, I think he needs to help out with these investigations as much as he can to clear his name, because a lot of people think Biden would have had something to do with these mass riggings. I don't think he would. I truly don't think the man is that devious or smart to fraudulently cast millions of votes to himself. So, yeah, that's basically how I feel about it. I think as of right now, since the race is called, Biden is projected winner. I think unless these legal cases prove something really bad, I think he will take office on the 20th of January. Yeah. And I think from that point, he will be the 46th president. Granted, we don't know how long he's going to be the 46th president. Might be 2 years, might be 24 hours, but we know he's going to be president as of right now.
Yeah, so, I think my final note on elections is that I do tend to agree that the election system in the United States should be evolved and overhauled. It's been pretty stagnant for many years. You know, if you voted, you notice the machines are pretty outdated. And in 2000, it was this whole issue because of you were basically like hole punching who you were voting. It was like a hole puncher, and then the ballots, if the hole was like hanging too large, then they thought it was a vote for somebody else, and that was the whole debate in 2000. Where all the lawyers were involved. Actually, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, new Supreme Court justice, was involved as a judge litigating that case back in 2000. But anyway, yeah, it was a huge controversy, and I think that with the whole mail-in thing, I do sometimes think that it's possible that there were some ballots that potentially were okay. So let's say this, for instance.
Sure.
Let's say that I am a USPS worker and I am a huge Trump supporter, right? And I see a Biden yard sign in front of somebody's house, and I just so happen to pick up their mail, and there's 4 ballots being cast, and I see the Biden yard sign in front of your yard, and let's say I'm a huge Trump supporter. Am I going to necessarily be super keen on making sure those ballots get in? Because you're the guy that decides whether you can't prove whether or not that happened. Now, I'm not saying that all people working for the USPS are trying to subvert the US election, and I think that there would be serious legal claims brought against them if they were caught doing that, and I don't think that most people did that. But there are concerns to be raised about the way in which we cast elections. I happen to be kind of a proponent for moving to an electronic system where when you show up on voting day, you like enter your social security number or something, and then it kind of pulls up your information that way. And that could be kind of interesting. Maybe instead of mail-in ballots, we can move to an online portal. But then that opens up a whole new can of worms of it getting hacked, and that also seems kind of like a bad idea. So there's not a great way to do it. I think that people are conflating that there are flaws with the electoral system with like I can prove that, like you said, like there's no way I think to prove all of this. If like let's assume that it happened, I still don't think there's any way to prove it, No.
Well, let's put it this way. Was there fraud in this election? There probably was some. There's fraud in every single election.
I read a guy got arrested in Texas for trying to vote for Trump twice, which is the stupidest way you can. I hope people know, if you're voting, they keep track of your social. So if you try to vote again, they're going to catch you immediately. Yes, so he voted.
Go from one polling place
the
to
same
another.
Data. Yes, and he got arrested, and now he has a felony. If you're going to fraudulently cast votes, be smart about it.
Or just don't do it. Fraudulently cast votes. I think that the
and like
question,
one of my friends got 2 ballots because, you know, if you live out in a house in LA like I do, basically, you know, there are 4 or 5 bedrooms typically in a house and they're all rented out, and people like rotate in and out constantly because people are constantly moving in and out of LA, you know?
yeah,
And my friend, he noticed that he had gotten a bunch of mail-in ballots. I think he said 2 or 3 from previous tenants that had lived there. And it's like, that's kind of a sketchy, it's kind of a sketchy way to vote. But at the same point, people are disabled and elderly and they need mail-in, they can't go to the polls, so they still need to be able to vote. So I'm not saying I have a solution. I'm just saying that, you know, it's probably true that there could be ways in which the system can be improved. Even look at, why does it take North Carolina? They're not going to release all their ballots till November 12th. Like, why is it taking 2 weeks?
Also,
You know, it's a little weird.
Little tail into that, I actually cast my vote through mail this time. 2 weeks is what it took for me to get the notification that my ballot was received. In that 2 weeks, say if I had voted closer, right, and I didn't know, there's a likelihood I could have went to that polling location, voted in person, and then they would have received my mail-in, and I would have had a fraud
felony
charge. Yeah. That's incredibly dangerous, I think, for a mail-in ballot system to be that outdated. If you're going to mail-in,
I'll give them a little bit of leeway on this one just because we're in the middle of a pandemic. They need a solution. And so I think they did the best they could. Obviously, it can be improved. And obviously, yes, there probably were cases of fraud that went on. In fact, I'm sure of it. I think that the main question that people have is, was there enough? Were there millions of, and that's what it would have taken to swing this election.
Yeah.
So the question is, were there millions of fraudulent ballots cast? I don't think there's enough evidence to support that there was. Now, I'm not saying it's completely impossible. I'm just saying that it's very improbable that that many fraudulent ballots were cast.
Yep. All right. Next topic. Let's talk about the Snyder Cut Twitter controversy. I was actually, just while you were saying that, I was trying to load up my California thing, and I'm trying to type it in, and on, like, it's called ballot tracks, and I just entered in my first name, last name, date of birth, and all of that, and it's like, we haven't seen a ballot for you. And I'm definitely voted, so hopefully, maybe it's because I'm a first-time California voter, so we'll see.
Maybe. And if not, we do need a better system. Absolutely, we need a better system.
And to be fair, California either way would have went the way it went. So, like,
that's a fair point. But I want to vote on the propositions in my local elections.
Yeah, come on. If you live in California and you voted for Prop 22, you're a piece of shit.
Did you see that it passed?
Yeah, no, that angered me. It's stupid.
You're anti-Prop 22?
I am anti-Prop 22. I don't want to get into that.
It's pretty overwhelmingly, but also Postmates and Uber and all those guys were advertising so heavily for people to vote for.
That's why I'm against it, mostly. I'm against the bill itself, but I feel like if you pump hundreds of millions of your marketing budget into swaying and lobbying for a certain political opinion, that's sketchy to me.
And that proposition passed like with the second most convincing vote. And I knew that was going to happen because it's like they've put so much money into advocating for Prop 22 and how amazing it is. And it's like, it doesn't even matter if it's true or not true. It's like when you're putting in that much money and you have that huge of a marketing machine, once again, it's kind of like, you know, all the Silicon Valley oligarchs up there running the show. Dude, they can reach so many people with Uber and Postmates. Every time you open the app, like, these are apps that we all rely upon so frequently. And every time I logged into Postmates and Uber, it's like Prop 22 is the best thing to ever come since Jesus. Everybody vote for it. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. And they also threw out these things like 4 in 1 people support it. But it's like, did you do a poll? And if so, why would I trust your poll? Because you want it to win, you know? Like, how do I know that this is legit? And actually, did you actually ask everybody that works for you?
Truth is, no.
That's what I'm saying.
Let us talk about the topic at hand. The associate producers of the Snyder League.
You guys aren't associate producers? Oh
no, not
dude, you haven't updated your IMDb yet?
Yeah. Here's the thing that is so weird to me about this is that I actually shill for BVS. I actually like the movie and think it's pretty good, and I enjoy watching it, and I have great memories. I watched it I think 7 or 8 times in IMAX, so I'm a bit of a BVS DCU enthusiast, as you could say. Now, have I mellowed out since my days when I was 15 or 16 years old and said it was the best movie I've ever seen? Yes, I've mellowed out a little bit. But I still think it's a good movie. I enjoy watching it. And what's so bizarre to me is that if you are not 100% in line in step with these people, they attack you. And it doesn't matter what I say of like, yeah, BVS is one of my top 5 DC movies of all the top 5 comic movies of all time. My only problem with it is that Batman kills. I don't like when he calls in strafing runs on people like he's in a fucking war zone or some bullshit. I've never read a comic book where that happens. And everybody's like, no, he does kill. And then okay, for those of you that don't know, let me backtrack. Let me just recap this entire situation and what happened. So basically, I put out a tweet and I said something to the effect of like, I enjoy BVS, but the problem that I have with it is that Batman calls in strafing runs and kills bunches and bunches of people in the movie. I don't like when Batman does that. That's all that I said. And people started freaking out after Jay Oliva, and I also said, okay, this was kind of the roast that I had in there. I was like, Zack Snyder, please read another comic book besides The Dark Knight Returns. So, of course, naturally, the director of the Dark Knight Returns movies responded to me and was like, I happen to quite like the Dark Knight Returns. What's the problem with it? And Zach and I have read other comic books. I think he also was involved in BVS as
he storyboarded for it.
Storyboarded for it. Okay. So he had some role in it. And yeah, Jay Oliva, I think, is a great director, and he's been a great influence on the DC animated movies. I have nothing against him at all. And I thought he was respectful in sort of responding to me. And then everybody was responding like, oh, you got burned, bro. You got burned by the guy that like actually worked on BVS and the Dark Knight Returns Part 1 and 2. They broke it up into 2 parts. And I was like, what do you mean I got burned? I'm allowed to think that Batman shouldn't call in strafing runs and mow down people. You know, I'm allowed to think that.
Let me just say, Kobe, when you get into drama, it stresses me out. Like, you get ratioed so bad by like all these fanboys. It drives me crazy.
Dude, you know what it is? It's like the toxicity of politics is rolling over into every other avenue of Twitter. Right. Comic book Twitter used to be like a really fun place, and now it is very much so like ratio this person with this bad hot take. It is such a negative, toxic place all of a sudden. I even look at what's going on with Evan. I am astonished with how people are so butthurt that he doesn't like the goddamn face remodel.
Dude, Evan is the sweetest. He's the sweetest guy I know.
He really is.
And he doesn't like the fact that Peter Parker now looks like a 16-year-old, and that's apparently controversial. I don't like it either. I have been replaying Spider-Man PS4 in anticipation of Miles Morales releasing in, I believe, 4 days.
Yep.
And the last face model, I forget the guy's name, John Bubniak, I think.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
He looks like someone who's 23, 24 years old. The new guy doesn't look like he has graduated fucking middle school yet, honestly.
I think the voice from Yuri Lowenthal is not going to match the new guy. It just is not.
I don't think so.
I don't think it's going to work that well, and maybe it is just nostalgia and we're used to the prior model, and maybe once we start playing the new game with the remaster and everything, we'll get used to it. But my general feeling is exactly what you said, that the de-aging is the biggest problem. Now, if they just made him look like an older Tom Holland, that's one thing, but they clearly de-aged the character about 8 to 10 years. So Evan has a right to complain about that, and yeah, it's just that aspect of being upset about other people's opinions about things that don't really matter.
I need these people to pick a lane, because I thought that Evan was the biggest Spider-Man fanboy ever, and that he was the biggest Insomniac shill, and that he would never say anything negative about him. But then all of a sudden he's a hater for Insomniac. And it's interesting because he actually didn't get a review copy for Miles Morales like he did with that initial game. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. Some people have said it's because you didn't like the face model. And if that's true, then that actually kind of ticks me off a little bit.
I think that's true. I think that's true. I think that's exactly what happened. These companies, I actually want to make a video on this. I'm going to reach out to Evan and ask his permission to comment on it, with his situation being the premise of it. But I want to do like a whole video essay about this, on the way in which video game companies exert their power over creators to extract positive reviews. This is something that companies have done for a very long time, where if you don't give them a good review for individual creators. Now, I'm not talking about IGN or any of these guys. Obviously, they get the review no matter what. And they have that certain level of built-in resilience of like, well, they're a trade and they get the game no matter what.
Yeah, and it's almost like any publicity is good publicity in that sense.
Correct. But that's why you see this game where YouTubers, they intentionally don't say anything negative about a game because they're playing politics. It's exactly what you would see a politician do. Like, I don't know, it's like exactly what you would see with AOC not throwing jabs at Nancy Pelosi because she wants to, play the game, right, of maintaining relationships with everybody and not alienating people. And that's exactly what happens when these companies exert their influence over people. It disincentivizes people to be critics, and it encourages people to be like these overpraising fanboys. And I think that's when you get into these environments where it's just this cringe level of praise and support for a game that, like, it just objectively is not that good. And people are just praising and fawning all over it. And it's a way to preserve your relationship with the company as a YouTuber. And I am very, very upset by the fact that Evan did not get a review copy, because he has been such a huge advocate for Insomniac. He did not send any negative attention their way at all. And they sent review copies to people that, like, are not anywhere on Evan's level in terms of support and enthusiasm for Insomniac. And I think that it's very disappointing. And as you mentioned, Jake, I would not go so far as to say that we have proof that that's why he didn't get a review copy. But
I would really hope that there's a different reason and that it's not as dramatic. Like maybe that they only had a certain amount of review copies and they thought, well, we gave it to him last time. So like there's definitely other reasons that it could be. And I don't know. The whole face model situation is just so bizarre to me because I understand why people don't like it. I also understand why they did it. I have a little experience, and I'm by no means an expert, but I understand their reasoning. Let's say that they were working on Spider-Man 2 and they have a cutscene where Peter Parker's talking to Doc Ock, and Doc Ock is obviously modeled after the voice actor. So he looks great on the new technology. They're doing it fully on PS5. It's not cross-platform, and he looks just like almost photorealistic. Then they cut to Peter Parker and it looks a little bit wonky because the face doesn't quite match up with Yuri Lowenthal. So I get it. And then I also get why the change is concerning to people. But the fact that it has spawned so like the simple statement of like, I don't really care for the new face model, for people to suddenly act like Evan is like so ridiculously toxic. You're right. It's astonishing. I really don't get it.
Couldn't agree more. Dustin?
I have nothing to add.
Actually, so another thing that people seem really upset about, which I think is interesting, and this we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but people seem really upset that Miles Morales is like 15 hours to platinum, 15, 20 hours to platinum, and like 8 to 11 hours to complete the campaign, despite them already having come out and said that it was a spin-off title that would not feature as much content as the first game. I don't know. I personally made a video where I said that I might actually end up liking this one more than Spider-Man PS4, because as much as I liked Spider-Man 2018, I felt that there were a lot of moments of filler or AGLs where it's like, oh, go over here to watch this cutscene. Oh, and then go over here to watch this cutscene. And there wasn't a lot of action taking place. Whereas Miles Morales could be more akin to, say, Arkham City, where it's a lot more thriller rather than, all of the filler stuff going on, because they only have a limited time to tell this story. And obviously I haven't played the game yet. I just think that it's an interesting criticism for people to say that because it's not the length of a brand new AAA game, it's not the length of The Last of Us Part 2, that for whatever reason that means it's going to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I completely agree. And I just think that the comic book Twitter space needs to be a lot less toxic. It's very disheartening to see how cultish it is. And the Snyder Cut people are literally like a cult. I mean, they move like a mob, where any tweet that you post of like, oh, Batman shouldn't kill, it's like, and it's not even like, oh, I disagree with you. It's literally like, you're a fucking child and you are such a little baby, like stuck with the animated series. Like, Batman is awesome when he kills. We want him to be the Punisher. Fuck you. And like, why? Why are you this opinionated about it? It is so superfluous to me and absurd.
Right. Or if you say
and
that
it
you didn't
hasn't
really care
always
for
been
Man of
this way.
Steel, Or like if you say you don't care for Man of Steel, then they're like, oh, then you just live in the 70s with Christopher Reeve and you want him to wear trunks and you want him to. It's like, no, I don't. I didn't say any of that. I just said that I didn't personally care for that movie. And that's not even my opinion. That's just what I see people get attacked over.
Yeah. Let me actually pull up some of the tweets that were sent at me if I can, because they were hilarious and absurd at the same time. And it's kind of like, I'm amazed that people even care that much, in the sense that I don't care if other people like the same movies that I do or dislike the same movies that I do. And on one hand, I like that we can have a vigorous debate and that people care, in the sense of like, if nobody cared about the movies, then that would be kind of lame and we wouldn't be excited for them. So I kind of like that aspect of it, that we're all passionate. I just think it could be channeled in a more productive way.
Well, I think that the problem is that it gets to a point where they're not debating you about the movie. They're trying to insult you because you have a different opinion than them.
Right. So like my tweet got 108 likes, and then Jay Oliva came in and responded, and his response got over 1,000 likes right away. And then everybody's like, you got destroyed, you got ratioed, this and that. And I was like, sure, dude, sure. But it was really interesting. Now, actually, I'm going through his Twitter right now. And did he delete oh no, he didn't. Okay, so Jay Oliva, I just saw this. So I tweeted out my post. He said, Zach and I have read quite a few comic books other than The Dark Knight Returns. I happen to like The Dark Knight Returns. What's wrong with it? Question mark. And then this Cal El fan 49 with the Snyder Cut producer thing in his bio has the meme where the guy he's like, oh, and then all the people behind him are like freaking out because he just dropped a good verse or whatever. You know that meme?
Yeah.
And then he did the same exact thing. He responded that too, as if he destroyed me. And it's like, why are you leaning into this like tribal politics? I mean, we're all DC fans. Why? I just don't understand.
DC fans suck.
The thing is, like, I truly do not care what someone's opinion of Spider-Man is. Like, personally, I like the Raimi films. I don't really care that much about the new Tom Holland movies. Not that they're bad or that they don't entertain me. It's just that, like, Spider-Man 2 resonates me on a much higher level than Far From Home. But if someone else were to come and say, Spider-Man Homecoming is far and away the best of any Spider-Man movie, I would definitely disagree with that opinion, but I wouldn't hold that against them as a person. And that's what's so bizarre to me, is just that we're vilifying each other. And I don't know, the whole cancel culture thing is just becoming so cancerous on social media in particular. Because if we were having these debates face to face, that's not how you would be talking. You know, it would be much more civil. I guarantee it, for the most part. There are some people who wouldn't be. But I think it's that, you know, we're not seeing each other as people on social media. We're just seeing the words that other people are saying. And if we happen to disagree, it's easy to go after the individual. Whereas, you know, if we're in person discussing, you know, Batman versus Superman versus The Dark Knight, we're going to be giving logistic reasoning as to why we have that opinion, you know, because you're not going to sit across a table from someone and be like, freaking snowflake, you just don't like it because you're afraid of guns.
Well, so I posted my tweet, and exactly like you said, the incentive structure is skewed towards being toxic and combative, because what is going to get more retweets? If I'm followed by 1,000 Snyder Cut fanatics and I retweet my comment and I'm like, yeah, you make some good points, but I disagree because of this and that would get like 2 likes. If I'm like, you fucking idiot, Snyder is the Lord and Savior, like, that would get a lot more likes. If you're like, you're an idiot, you're a little baby, and you're scared of Batman killing, and like, get your big boy panties on, and like, stop crying. And I got all these like, okay, boomer things, or people calling me a gatekeeper. And I'm like, I'm the most anti-gatekeeper person ever. I enjoy talking Batman sometimes more with people that have only seen the movies, that are just casual, you know. So I'm definitely not a gatekeeper of any sort, but people want to say that. And then also there was this guy named Mark Hughes, some blue check on Twitter. He responded to Jay Oliva's response to me and said, I have a lot of comics featuring Batman using guns. I also own copies of every Batman movie, and he kills people in every single film except Batman and Robin, the old 1966 movie. I love how he's explaining this to me like I don't know this. That's hilarious. If folks don't prefer Batman killing, that's fine. But claiming it's unfaithful or not Batman, quote unquote, is false. And first of all, I never claimed that it is unlike Batman to kill. Yes, if you go back to comics from 1939, 1940, 1941, he actually used guns and he was more like a Punisher character, but that's not the character that anybody fell in love with or knows today. You know, if you go back and read Batman from 1940, it's a completely different character in every single way, besides that his name is Bruce Wayne. You know, he literally has like uh AK-47s and it's just not the same character. You can't say that you know that it's really the same character in any sense. And yeah, so the comics argument is absurd. People showing Jay Oliva also showed screenshots of Batman killing people from comic books that are over 80 years old, as if that's supposed to convince me that I should be okay with Batman killing. Whereas, you know, all the content I grew up with, which is basically three things: Chuck Dixon's 90s comics, the Bat Family comics of Nightwing and Batman and Robin and all those great books from the 90s. Chuck Dixon, he was fantastic. That was like the golden age of Batman comics. The Batman Arkham games, obviously very influential in my life. Batman the Animated Series, very influential. And I've also quite enjoyed the New 52 comics run. So that's what I've been exposed to. I've watched the movies and recognized that every director that has filled those movies, also for him to say here, every single film Batman kills, we've not really had any Batman film directed by a comic book slash Batman enthusiast.
They've all been like almost reinventions of the character. Like
all
the
of them are
89 Batman, that's not a Batman movie. That's a Tim Burton movie featuring Batman characters. Dark Knight trilogy, it's the same thing. They're Chris Nolan movies featuring Batman characters. That's not to say that they aren't based on storylines of the character, but they are very much reinventions of the character. And if I remember correctly, I agree. You weren't saying like Batman never kills. You were saying like that people are acting like Batman versus Superman is the Batman the animated series but in live action, which just isn't the case. And you can't be a loyalist to that iteration of Batman and also be a loyalist to Zack Snyder's Batman. Not to say that you can't love both adaptations, but just to say that you can't claim that they're the same thing.
Exactly.
You can't
be
say
a loyalist. Exactly.
You can't say Kevin Conroy's Batman is the same as Ben Affleck's Batman. It's just not true. And that's the point. Like, obviously there are stories where Batman has killed. However, it is a pretty common trait of the character. In fact, most comics do have Batman with the no killing rule. And even the exceptions that people have, such as KG Beast, that is debunked very heavily because Batman knew that he'd be saved, so he didn't kill him. When it comes to even The Dark Knight Returns, there's a lot of speculation that Batman does not actually kill in that comic.
It's a contested issue. Yeah, there is debate both ways as to whether it's not clear that he does. The other thing about this is that we're talking about the Batman movies. I think there's also a difference between Batman calling in strafing runs and blowing up 8 dudes outside of a warehouse and Batman reluctantly killing the Joker in like The Killing Joke. There's a huge difference between those things. Batman does not show any hesitation or trepidation in killing people, whereas in other iterations of recent memory where Batman does kill, it is very much so like a huge moral dilemma for the character. And we've seen him struggle with the contemplation of killing the Joker and killing other characters. And I think that's fine. I like the idea of pushing Batman to the edge and questioning that morality. That's one of the most interesting aspects of the character. The notion, however, that I just have to accept Batman calling in strafing runs on people and mowing them down, blowing them up, and Zack Snyder then coming out and saying, no, Batman never kills in my movie. He commits third-degree manslaughter, you see, because he calls in the strafing run and blows up the car, and when the bullets hit the gas in the car, then the car blows up, and then the car kills all the people, so Batman is innocent.
See, and the thing is, the trigger on the gun, it's the bullet that kills the person.
Correct. Yeah, that's involuntary manslaughter. Like, Zack Snyder's defenses of this stuff are absurd. And once again, when he was asked about it, he said, oh, Batman's killed in all the other movies. Why are people mad about this one? And it's like, hello, you're missing the point entirely. Nobody made the argument that Batman has never killed in the movies. We're making the argument that we want to see the first comics accurate. Again, when I say comics accurate, I don't mean 1941. I mean like the comics, the character that we all know and love.
It's bizarre,
anybody still
honestly,
alive.
to me.
Nobody alive years Batman 1941 as their Batman. We're talking about Batman from the 80s, the 90s, the 20s, the 2000s, the 2010s. That character does not kill, and if he does so extremely reluctantly, and it is a huge moral dilemma. Batman in this movie poses there is no consideration to it at all. And moreover, he doesn't even, there's this whole notion of like, it's a character arc, bro. It's a character arc. You're missing the character arc. At what moment is there any conversation about no character killing? Arc.
Here's the thing that's so bizarre to me is that you have people like coming to you, and some of these guys having worked on Batman properties saying killing is a defining trait of Batman, because it's not. Like it's pretty common in, like I mentioned, modern comics for Batman to not kill. In the films, in like the Dark Knight trilogy, I mean, Batman was also very anti-killing, and the only reason that there were casualties was just because the world was so like grounded in realism that there just had to be. And so I don't know, that one there's a lot of debate up. Some people say Bale didn't kill. He definitely did. With Tim Burton, I mean, that was kind of when the films were trying to determine what Batman would be, because we just got out of like all the 60s show and everything. So this was like the first real attempt to make Batman dark and brooding on screen. And Tim Burton doesn't happen to love comics that much. And what I will say in his defense is that yes, his Batman killed, but at least they stayed true to that. So for example, Joker is dead by the end of the movie. Penguin is dead by the end of the second movie. Like, it's not like Joker is just still running around for some random reason with a Batman that also happens to kill. And in regards to the whole character arc thing, I agree. There is no conversation about Batman killing. And the strafing run happens right after the supposed moment where Batman realizes that he's going too far. So that's just such a dumb argument. I have nothing against people who prefer Batman, who's more like the Punisher, who isn't opposed to using lethal force if necessary. But to say that it's like irrefutably a trait of his character, I just think is totally ill-informed and just adds to the toxicity that already exists around the problem.
And how scary is it that people that are actually running these properties don't acknowledge that there is a huge fan base out there? Pretty much all of my I won't say all of my fans, over half of people that follow my channel and follow my Twitter agree with me on this issue. They too are, more familiar with Batman from the animated series and the recent comics and all of that. And the other thing is that, wait, so your defense for Batman killing, it's circular logic. Zack Snyder's defense for Batman killing in his movies is that Batman has killed in other movies. And then that Chris Nolan could say, well, Batman is killed in prior movies. And then you go back to Tim Burton. He's like, well, Batman's killed before in the comics. And it's this like circular reasoning where you constantly use other people's work as evidence for your own claims. But what I'm saying is that there has never been a legitimately comics accurate Batman movie. My argument is that Zack Snyder did not take Batman off of the comic book page and put him on the big screen. He just didn't do that. Yeah. And I think that is okay. He doesn't have to do that. He can do whatever he wants. I don't care in that sense. I just don't want people to falsely be under the impression that Batman is a character who is known for killing. He is known as a character.
It's more common for him to have a no-kill rule.
Correct. Yeah. And to cite the minority of instances in which he has killed is frankly absurd. And that's why The Killing Joke was such a big deal, because in 1988, when The Killing Joke was published, there was this huge debate of, did Batman kill at the end of the book? And there was a legitimate thought of maybe Batman actually killed. You want to know why that was impactful and powerful? Because prior to that in the comic books, for several decades, Batman hadn't killed anybody. And I'm not saying that there has never been a comic book writer that has come along or a movie director that has had Batman kill. Every creator takes their own creative liberties, and some people just think it's cooler for Batman to be more like the Punisher, and that's fine. All I know is that when I tweet that Batman doesn't kill, as I just did 1 minute ago, I already have a ton of comments and likes and retweets of people agreeing. So the most disconcerting part for me is how, and again, I don't mean to speak negatively of Jay Oliva in any way. I think that he was pretty respectful in his response. I just think that it's weird how it's almost villainized to have this position that Batman doesn't kill.
Yeah, because he could have come out and said, I disagree. I personally happen to like this. And we have read other comics. Like, I just think that the problem is that I think it's trying to, I'm trying to think of the word. It's trying to devalue your opinion. It's trying to make your opinion irrelevant when it's actually a very common one, and one that is arguably more common than the alternative. And the fact that you're not even hating on people who have a differing opinion, but then trying to come in and vilify someone or make their opinion irrelevant is, I think, just what feeds into the cancer of all the toxicity. And then, like, the idea that then you need to get canceled or something, or ratioed. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah. And I'm kind of concerned with how the Snyder Cut people on Twitter are kind of like hijacking the fandom in a sense. I've seen, because they're so toxic and so abrasive. And again, a couple years ago, I was considered a part of the Snyder Cut loons. Like, I wanted the Snyder Cut, and I have nothing against Snyder Cut Twitter, quote unquote. All I'm saying is that they fucking act like, tell me there's any difference in behavior between MAGA Twitter and Snyder Cut Twitter. There is not. They act exactly identical, in my opinion. It's like mob rule. And if there is one person that steps out of bounds of like, hey, I didn't really like this part of BBS, and it's like, you're an idiot. You don't understand. This is the character arc, bro. This is the character arc. And that's what they always say about Batman killing. And they assume that his vague speech at the end of like, men are still good, as if that means that Batman isn't going to kill, or that it's never explicitly stated that Batman wasn't going to kill going forward. And it certainly was never stated at the beginning of the movie as to why Batman was killing. It's just like these vague lines with Alfred about how he's lost his humanity and this and that. Also, you can't have a character arc if you didn't show what got him there. In other words, we can't appreciate the fact that he killed if we never got to saw the prior parts of where he didn't kill and how he had this moral code. What caused that to break? That'd have been an interesting thing to show.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if before Batman versus Superman had released, there had been like an Under the Red Hood movie where it had shown Batman's descent after Joker had killed Robin, and where he starts getting more lethal, and they could have done like a Death in the Family thing where he's trying to find Jason, or it's Dick Grayson in Snyder's universe who got killed by Joker, which kind of is also obnoxious to me personally. If you're not as much of a purist, you probably wouldn't care as much about which Robin got killed. But if you had a movie where Batman is trying to save Robin and it's desperately getting more and more high with the stakes, and he starts using lethal force and Alfred's trying to guide him like, don't go this route, then Batman versus Superman is infinitely more interesting because there's this backstory that is visual and it's something that we've all witnessed, versus just having like cryptic Easter eggs. Like, anybody who saw the Robin suit who has not read A Death in the Family had no idea what that was about. It was like, what? There's no clear reason that they would assume that that's why he's a killer now, unless you already knew that story arc.
Correct. And then it's just like, well, you should just know that. And there's this assumption of, yeah. So, no, I completely agree. I just think that it is very weird for people to take 80 years of Batman history and fixate on the like 10 to 15% where Batman kills, or that I give a shit what Tim Burton had to say about Batman. He's not a Batman expert or enthusiast. Chris Nolan, we have every bit of evidence to believe that he was like a very casual Batman fan, and it's pretty evident by his movies, which is fine. I'm not saying that, but I would say that Zack Snyder is, and that's what's disappointing to me, is that I wanted the first really, really accurate version of Batman on the big screen, on the silver screen, because my argument is that we've never seen Batman ripped off of the comic book page on the big screen. And again, not the 1941 comic book page, but something in recent memory that people alive would remember, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that we've ever seen that. And I would love to see that. I would love to see the Bat Family. This Matt Reeves movie is also not really the direction that I would take it. I would go more in a Bat Family direction of having Batman in the prime of his career. Maybe at the beginning of the first movie, he's recruiting like Batgirl and Robin and Nightwing and training all those guys and gals. So that would be cool to see. And that's personally what I would want to see, instead of like these. Yeah, like you said, it very much so is Matt Reeves and Chris Nolan making Matt Reeves and Chris Nolan movies that Batman is in, and putting Batman in their artistic style, which is okay. That's not the direction that I would go. The main reason that I'm disappointed is that I think that Zack Snyder was best positioned to make the first authentic and genuine portrayal of Batman on the big screen, and he fucked it up with Batman calling in strafing runs and blowing people up for no reason. And not only that, it wasn't even necessary for the plot either. You could have had more levity and weight if Batman was contemplating killing Superman. And then at the end, imagine this. Imagine that in the scene with the Martha scene, I know that everybody, whatever, rags on it. But what if Batman had never killed up to that point, and Batman had a discussion with Alfred of like, he's losing his humanity. He might start killing. He might really consider like killing somebody or whatever. And he's getting close to that point. And then he's at the point where he's just about to kill Superman, and then his humanity is restored. And then he goes to the warehouse and he doesn't kill because his humanity is restored in that moment. Instead, he's like, oh, Martha, my humanity's restored. Okay, let me go blow all these people up.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wait, why? Like, think about how interesting it would have been if BVS was about pushing Batman to the edge and testing his moral code. And Alfred in the first act of the movie is like, you've never killed, and you're being more gruesome and violent than you've ever been before, like maiming these people and putting the bat symbol on them. Why are you doing this? Why are you going into this dark place? And we understand that Batman has lost his humanity. Batman could have a monologue and do a flashback scene of Robin dying. And then we can get the context of like, in that situation, if Batman had killed the Joker, he could have saved Robin. And that is basically, causing him to have perpetual guilt. And he's feeling guilty and feeling like the rule that he had in the moral code caused Jason to die. And that is, causing him to feel regret for his code, and that makes him doubt it and question it. And then it goes up to Superman, and he has the potential to kill Superman, and he's actually going to go through with it. And then at the very last moment, his humanity is restored, and then he doesn't kill, and he recognizes like, yeah, I should have never done that. Or, Batman does again try to kill Superman at some point, but again, just him like mercilessly killing people with strafing runs and bombing runs with the Batwing. And not only that, as I mentioned prior, I do think there's a difference between, calling in strafing runs on people and like killing one person reluctantly. And that's kind of what I'm getting at I'm all for challenging Batman's moral code. I'm not for Batman just being the Punisher or being like in a Transformers movie and just blowing people up.
Yeah, you're right. And that was even something that was kind of explored in the Dark Knight trilogy, even though there were moments like in the League of Shadows base where he starts the giant fire that causes casualties and such. And then there's that moment at the end where he lets Raish die, or they call him Ra's in that movie. But like in the Dark Knight,
I won't kill you, but I don't have to save you either.
I think it would have been cooler if he like tried to save him, and then Ra's had been like too proud to admit that.
And even there, like he pushed him away. Yeah,
Ra's put himself in that situation though, so technically he killed himself, and Batman just didn't save him. But I digress. In the Dark Knight,
I think Batman would have saved him though. That's the thing.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what I think makes him such a redeeming character, is that yes, he's this dark vigilante, but he's always and that's what made the animated series so good, is that he's gonna go save anyone that Two-Face is holding hostage, but he's also trying to save Two-Face in that same sense. He's trying to get him the rehabilitation that he needs, and that's what I'd like to see translated to the films. And I think that The Dark Knight actually got probably closest to a degree. He really is trying to understand the Joker's psyche in that movie. When he does end up killing Harvey Dent at the end, it really is because in that situation they'd kind of written him into a corner. There wasn't really another way to get out of it, because if he just tosses a batarang and like knocks the gun out of his hand, Nolan's world isn't built to be that convenient. It would have been unrealistic. And so, but I mean, that kind of destroys him. Like the fact that he ends up killing him kind of destroys him. But I agree, that's definitely what I would like to see more of in the films. And it's true. I don't think that we have seen a very accurate representation of Batman. I think that our most accurate on-screen representation isn't even the animated series, because they had to pander to kids a little bit. I do think it's the Arkham games.
Yep. Agreed. And you don't have to agree fully with that to acknowledge that, again, in the vast majority of cases, Batman doesn't kill. And the notion that we're these absurd gatekeeping fanboys for saying that is just ludicrous. So that's all I have to say about that. But that's my rant. I'm curious to know, everybody watching in the comments, if you're on YouTube, I'm just curious to know what you guys think about that. that issue. So leave your thoughts down below on both the election and that discussion about Batman killing. So very interested to see what you guys have to say.
So I don't know if we have any other topics planned. I was wondering what you guys thought of Avengers losing money, only selling 3 million units.
Dude, $67 million lost. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah.
Dustin, did you hear about that? Dustin's gone.
He's not with us.
$7 million. Oh my God. Is that one of the biggest losses of any video game in video game history? That's why I wish Dustin was here, because he would know this. But
he probably got tired of listening to us talk about Batman and left.
I know. But $67 million, dude. And there's two parts of it, right? The first part is that it really, really sucks for the Square Enix employees. And there are going to be people that are laid off and lose their jobs from this and have their career and reputation damaged. Like, imagine if, I don't know, like, let's say your first game directing gig was Marvel's Avengers, which is known in the industry to be a flop. Like, that can be a tarnish on your reputation and career. So that sucks. And I wish that the game was successful. That's the place that we're all coming from, is that we want the game to be successful. And then the other hand of it, it's like the president of Square Enix would do interviews and boast about how this is going to be the highest selling super video game of all time. It's going to blow Spider-Man PS4. I'm kind of paraphrasing. He didn't say he was going to blow it out of the water, but he was very braggadocious about how well this game was going to do. And it's like, dude, this is a games as a service game. In what world did you think this is going to, beat Spider-Man PS4, Batman Arkham City? I mean, come on, dude. Yeah. That's just ludicrous,
It's very strange to me that they went with the model that they did for this game. I think that it would have served them a lot better if they'd had an open world New York City or San Francisco. And, people are like, well, you can't do that because they go all over. And it's like, yeah, well, technically, Batman has the Batman Incorporated, but that doesn't mean that you have to introduce all of the Batmen. You can tell a contained story in New York City with those characters and give them each free roam abilities and have side missions for each character. And it's strange to me that they went the games as a service route. And the game itself, it's strange to me how broken it is. Not even just from like a graphical or performance perspective, but just the whole system. When you look at how much time and effort and money went into this project, it's kind of astounding to me that it was such a flop. And I feel like it's kind of justified. Like, I don't feel like it's this incredible game that just underperformed. I think it really is really rough around the edges. And there are redeeming qualities. Some people like the story and some people like the gameplay. And I think that there's fun to be had with it. But at the same time, I can see why it underperformed. And it's always kind of shocking to me when I see a project of this scope. And I was like, how did no producer or director or anyone kind of come forward and say, listen, we like this, but we need to take it in a broader direction. This is the Avengers. It needs to be like a grand game. It can't just be, this sort of, I don't know, Skyrim or Anthem clone thing that some people might enjoy and some people might not with. Like, I don't know. I look at the campaign. I'm like, how did you only get MODOK, Abomination, and Taskmasters as the bosses of that game? Why is Ultron not playing a part in it? Like, what? I don't know. I just don't get it.
Where the hell is Thanos?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, here's another problem that I've ragged on for a long time, is that these video games and movies in the superhero space, doesn't matter what medium it is, they save things and reserve things for later movies and later games. And I guarantee you their philosophy was like, we're going to save Thanos and we're going to save this and this storyline for the next game. But the problem is that a second game, a second movie, a second comic book run, whatever, is not guaranteed. And when you save and plan things out too far ahead, then you risk the fact of, starting off with mediocrity, and that jeopardizes you going forward. I think that also happened in the DCEU, where Zack Snyder was really planning and had bold visions of like, this is going to be our whole slate years and years down the line, but it's not guaranteed. All it takes is one movie to come out with mixed reviews, and then WB wants to get rid of you, and then you're done. And that's what I think people need to start doing a little bit more, is it's like in BVS, why was it Doomsday? Why was it Steppenwolf in Justice League 1? Are you kidding me? Like, put Darkseid in there. Do Justice League War, the live action movie. We've already done the animated movie. That's what we wanted to see. We wanted to see the Justice League fight Darkseid in New York City, you know? And instead we got fucking Steppenwolf. I mean, what a joke.
Who the
And
fuck is Steppenwolf?
exactly. Exactly. And yeah, they're just trying to say, would you agree with that, Dustin, that creators in Hollywood and video games are trying to like save things for later movies, like save the best for last, and they in planning, then they don't end up getting that second movie? Because in the case of Zack Snyder's Justice League, he wanted to get Darkseid in the second movie and lead with Steppenwolf, and then he never got the second movie. I guess now he gets the Snyder Cut, but
I can name 3 failed franchises that were set up in one movie right off the top of my head without even thinking about it. The Dark Universe. They cast literally every person in that series.
Because remember Dracula Untold?
Oh man, yeah. Shit. I had it. The Bumblebee, the Transformers universe that they were going for. They canceled that because Bumblebee didn't do too good at the box office, even though it was critically and I'd say publicly the best Transformers movie.
That was a good movie, dude.
Far. I like it. It was a good movie. And then you also have like now
what about
my train of thought's gone.
X-Men too, to some extent.
So I think Dark Phoenix was always meant to be the last thing in the franchise. They just don't want to tell their investors that.
Yeah.
But I feel like that went as far as it did. Or look at X-Men Origins, that sub-series that they were gonna start. Mm-hmm. They had another movie planned for that. I forget who it was about, but the Wolverine movie did so shit that they never ran forward with that. You never want to go into a project hoping to set up something for a sequel because that just shows you're not too interested in the project you're currently working on.
I think that it comes down to just making sure that you're telling a complete self-contained story. You look at Batman Begins, for example, and yes, they set up the Joker for the sequel, but if The Dark Knight had never happened, Batman Begins still works as a film, whereas there's a lot of other things like Zack Snyder's Justice League that, like, honestly, I kind of am predicting that HBO will try to revive the whole Snyderverse a little bit, because that's going to leave it off on a cliffhanger where everyone's waiting for Darkseid to show up. And it really kind of, if there's never that sequel, then it sort of sours that initial film because it's building up to nothing.
The initial film's already soured enough, I think. I honestly, what's going to blow my mind is the fact that people think this is going to be the Citizen Kane of comic book movies. And I really don't think it's going to be anything more than just like an average superhero movie.
What are you talking about? The Snyder Cut?
Zack Snyder scale, yeah. I don't think it's going to be some 10 out of 10. I think it's going to be a 6 or a 7.
Dude, it's going to be a long-ass movie.
Granted, you see fanboys love 3s and 2s, so like a 6 and a 7 will be the Citizen Kane of comic book movies to them. But, not throwing out disses, but I'm throwing out disses. You guys made Aquaman get $1 billion at the box office. What's wrong with you? Shazam only made $300 million. What the hell is that about?
Dustin, we had a question for you. We were discussing a couple minutes ago. We were discussing Marvel's Avengers, which lost $67 million. Has there ever been a video game in video game history that has lost that much money that you can think of?
I'd say Anthem, for sure. Probably lost a lot. Yeah. I see Anthem on sale for like $10 at GameStop sometimes.
Yeah.
NBA.
Okay, there was a guy. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There's this guy who started his own studio, and he had worked on a really successful game franchise himself. He started his own studio, and he released this like multiplayer game that flopped, and then he had to close the studio. What was the name of the studio?
So I think you're getting that confused. So former MLB pitcher Curt Schilling started a game company.
Yes.
Called 38 Studios, and with that company he made an RPG called Kingdoms of Amular Reckoning, which was not a bad game by any means. But the thing is that's such a generic title, and it was 2010. Every other game coming out was an RPG.
Right.
And the thing is, I think he got like $400 million in loans from the state of Rhode Island, like just a lot of money, and he didn't pay that off. So when the game didn't bring in the bucks, he had to foreclose the business and go bankrupt. Now recently we have seen that we have seen that series come back with the remaster done by THQ.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, that's not gonna be a thing. The other thing I think of off the top of my head would be like Overkill's The Walking Dead, that Walking Dead game made by the Payday people.
Oh yeah, they put a bunch of money in that game, didn't they?
They Starbreeze, like the entire company that owned Overkill, I forget their name now. I think it is Starbreeze. They were betting their entire business on that,
Jeez.
legitimately, because they were in such dire straits. And then Starbound took the license away from them because the game was such a disappointment. And that
Did
basically nearly bankrupted the company. I think they got a bailout from the government, but it's still,
what?
yeah.
That's so funny. Did No Man's Sky ever turn around? Because I remember that was a
Yeah,
huge
no,
disaster
it's
when
a
it
good game.
launched.
It's
It
actually a
is.
pretty good game. And I think the game you're talking about, the multiplayer one, was APB. So that was made by a guy named David Jones, who actually was the creator of the Grand Theft Auto series. Not the
Oh.
3D era games, but like the original top-down 2D ones from the 90s.
Oh.
And then he went on, he made Crackdown, which is like an awesome 360 exclusive. The third one, not so much, but that's what he was doing after that. And then he made this massive multiplayer game called All Points Bulletin, which was like be anything, do anything, be a cop, be a robber, do whatever. That game was a huge flop.
Was it?
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
Millions of dollars lost. And like, you can look back at Destiny's purported $500 million budget. If that game wasn't a success, Bungie would have been done. I think they would have been shut down fully. That's the thing with these new budgets. Is like Marvel's Avengers probably had a budget of 200-300 million dollars.
Mm.
And following up the biggest movie of all time with a game of the same name, you would think that it would make around the same amount of money. But when you have such negative press as the Avengers did, and you have such a interesting game director who says some very dumb things, it can lead to some very bad press. Also, the fact that every character having a season pass also isn't the smartest idea. But I digress. I feel like they were just let down by their corporate greediness. They should have really focused on it as a co-op game first, not a games as a service.
I think you're right, and kind of going back to what Kobe said as well in regards to like utilizing everyone at once rather than saving it. I think that that not only goes for them trying to do like a sequel, for example, but also saying, yeah, let's not use Loki now. Let's use him down the line somewhere in the DLC. Or, oh, yeah, let's save Spider-Man for later. Like, I think that what you need to do is make it a complete package from the beginning. Don't save stuff for later. And also just look at the package as a whole and say, is this something that's worth $60, $70 at launch? And I don't know. I think that the games as a service model just inherently doesn't fit the Avengers. I mean, particularly because it's not a shooter, so it's kind of hard for it to be a looter shooter. And I think of what it could have been. You could have had like, 2-hour campaigns for each of the Avengers. You could have had like a 2-hour campaign of Captain America in World War II, a 2-hour campaign of Thor on Asgard. You could have had a 2-hour campaign with Black Widow in Russia. Like they could have done so many things and then had an open world San Francisco that you could explore while being overtaken by Ultron or something. And that would have been a much more appealing product to the fan base of superhero games because they were marketing this game to the Arkham and Spider-Man community. The problem is that Arkham and Spider-Man are not in any way, shape, or form games as a service. They do have DLC, but it's not the same thing. They were both complete packages at launch, and then they just had some additional content that came out later. So I think that their mistake was that they marketed it to the wrong people and they chose the wrong genre of game for these characters.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And then there's also a THQ closed down too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so that happened in, I believe, 2012.
yeah, and they had published a lot of video games that I really liked. I was big into RTS games when I was like an early teen, so I really liked Warhammer. I really liked Company of Heroes is one of my all-time favorite games. Such a fun RTS game. I highly recommend if anybody has a PC to start playing Company of Heroes. It's a World War II real-time strategy game. incredibly fun, like super super fun, and yeah, so definitely check that out. But that's just a random note. I was just literally googling like companies that failed. I still can't think of the exact company I thought that would fail. I saw a video on it one time, and people were really dogging on the guy because he worked on a really successful franchise. I want to say Gears of War, but maybe not. He
Oh
le-
yeah, Cliff Bleszinski. He made
Yes, that's
Lawbreakers.
exactly who I'm thinking of. Lawbreakers, exactly who I'm thinking of. That
Okay.
was a huge flop, right?
hmm
Yeah.
And then
The
I think he's currently semi-retired. So I think he's working on
uh,
something, but I think it's on the back burner
okay. Okay.
because he's
Yeah,
been designing games since he was 14 years old.
damn.
So he definitely has a love for it, and he's definitely talented. But I think Boss Key, the studio that he made, was unfortunate. What happened to them?
Lawbreaker seemed pretty fun. It was just more like they didn't have the marketing arm to get it to go big and get people to play it, you know?
I mean,
It really
apparently
it's tricky.
they one of the big thing that really killed Boss Key was actually the Disney Fox merger. That had a big thing to do about it
How
because
so?
Boss Key was going to make an alien first-person shooter
Mm.
where you would play as Newt, and then you would fight xenomorphs. And it was supposed to
Oh.
be like Half-Life, and then it got shelved. And that, on top of a failed battle royale game, kind of sealed it.
Mm.
Yeah, it's definitely a strange balance. I've been a hobbyist with Unreal Engine 4 and Blender and programs like that. I'm definitely not an expert. And that's not even I'm going into filmmaking, but I've considered just what it would be like trying to open an indie game studio. And it really is a tricky balance because you're an unknown name. And granted, you do have the technology to make good games. You like I have the full Unreal Engine 4 on my laptop right now. That's the same engine that is industry standard. I like there's so many resources that are either free or very cheap that you can use to make games, but you're a nobody. Like, how do you market the game when you have absolutely no following? And how do you make a game that stands out? But what will kill you as a game developer the first before you can even get a career off the ground is if you make a fan game.
hmm
Mm-hmm.
If you
Mm-hmm.
say, I'm making an Arkham Origins sequel or I'm Spider-Man game, you're gonna get a cease and desist order. And the only reason I bring that up is that I've seen so many and I get DM'd not super frequently, but like this last month I got two, which is pretty uncommon. I got two DMs from people who were like, "Hey, do you want to write the story for my Batman game?" And I'm like, "Dude, you're not gonna make a Batman game. I'm sorry, but you're probably not experienced enough to do it in the first place. And as soon as Warner Brothers smells it, and they will, you're gonna get shut down." And that's what
Yeah.
I actually see a lot. Like there are some pretty talented people
I mean,
working out there. There was like a Spider-Man project that was being done in like 2017. Looked pretty good,
oh,
but as
that
soon as Marvel saw it, they shut them down. And they're never like studios. I the justification drives me crazy because people are like, no, we're giving it out for free, so it's fair use. Or the other one is like, no, we're gonna finish it, then we'll sell it to Warner Brothers for them to release, and it's just never gonna happen. I don't know why people are suddenly. Maybe it's that we're all stuck inside and it's COVID and people just want something to do. But making a fan game is like the fastest way that you can kill yourself as a game developer before you even get started.
have fun, integrating the cloth physics on that cape that took some poor guy 3 years
Yeah,
to do.
I know. Yeah.
You know, and that's
yeah.
a guy who went to college. You're
Dude,
like
these
some
games are
16-year-old
hard to
kid.
make, dude. They're
Yeah.
hard to make.
If
Well,
you
granted, I mean, like I realistically could see a team of like two or three people putting together a game that's maybe half the scale of Arkham Asylum at this point, just with Unreal Engine 4. But they would have to both be very talented and probably spend 2 or 3 years working on it. And that's kind of my main issue with fan games anyway, is that you're either going to get a cease and desist order because Warner Brothers saw it or Disney saw it and they're not going to let you use their property because you're making a product. Technically, fan fiction, fan art, fan films, those are all technically illegal as well, but the studios don't generally interfere with those because it's kind of just the fandom interacting. Whereas when you're making a product, like a full game that you have to download to your computer, that
that
becomes,
could fall on the company if anything
yep,
malicious happens.
exactly.
So say if
And
I
yeah,
if I make like say Greg Pop's Arkham Origins rewrite. I'm like, I'm gonna make a fan game of that, and then I sneak a virus into it and release it. That's gonna fall on WB. It's not gonna fall on me. They're gonna care about the people who own the IP.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, and it's the other thing is that it's unsolicited. And studios will, it's no different than trying to sell your script for a Batman movie to Warner Brothers. They'll never see it if it's unsolicited. And the thing is, like, some people are like, no, I played a fan game, it works. The thing is, like, if you don't get shut down with your fan game, it's because absolutely no one has seen it. And I just don't get why you wouldn't choose a character from like the public domain that doesn't have copyright issues, or why you wouldn't just make a new IP. Because if you're talented enough to put one of those things together, you should absolutely be making money and getting attention for your work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tricky because people are such a big like they're big fans of Batman and Spider-Man. They're not fans of characters that they have to build from the ground up.
Right.
Also, the other consideration is even if you have a team of a couple people over several years, the voice acting is probably going to be shit. I doubt you have any budget to hire anybody good.
Yeah.
Because you gotta have it professionally done and have audio engineers make sure, like, if people are filming in different areas, the audio has to be perfect.
Well,
like,
and that's why
unlike
Warner
right
Brothers
there
would
when
never
my
release
P.
it. That's why, like, you couldn't sell it to Warner Brothers, because they have standards and they have, like, Gotham Knights I guarantee it has so many, like, okay, you can use this character to this extent, but you can't do this. You have to make the gameplay this way. And so it's very stringent on what they have to do. And so just you sending in your unsolicited fan game, they're probably going to send you a cease and desist order before it's even public. And I mean, people get mad at the cease and desist orders, but technically that's the studio being nice. That's them saying, we could sue you right now, but we're going to choose to let you stop working on this, and we'll be nice and not do that.
Well said. Okay, so can we wrap it up for this week?
Yeah, let's do it. Sorry, that was a really crazy tangent.
No, you're totally good. This is just perfect timing for me. Okay, thank you guys all for tuning in to episode 20 of the Anonymous Throwdown Podcast. We'll be back here next Sunday with episode 21. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the video, comment, and I know I've been saying this for months, but we really are about to get on streaming platforms. I'm going to start working on that this week on uploading our catalog. And I should say within a week or two, we'll be totally caught up to date. And then every week I'm going to be uploading the new episodes onto like Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all that great stuff. So that's something you guys have been asking for a lot, and we will be delivering to you. So I know that it's annoying if you don't have YouTube Premium. You've got to keep the window open for an hour and a half, and you can't like go on walks and just listen to it in the background. So have no fear, we will be on Apple Podcasts and Spotify soon. So definitely look forward to that. And I will see you guys. We will see you guys next week.
Yeah, it's not your podcast.
I know. I always do the intro and outro like it's my own video. I always do that. All right, see you guys. Peace.